right. We're reading in Mark, and we're in chapter 4. And Jesus continues to teach. We talked last week a little bit about the family, about Mary and his brothers coming to see him. And he said, who are my brothers? Who is my mother? And all of you are my mother and brother. And how uncomfortable that may have seemed at that moment. But Jesus obviously had a good reason for speaking that. Now we get into him continuing and talking about parables. And so this is in verse 1 of chapter 4, it says, and once again Jesus began teaching by the lake shore. And a very large crowd soon gathered around him, so he got into a boat. And then he sat on the boat while all the people remained on the shore. And he taught them by telling many stories in the form of parables, such as this one. Listen, a farmer went out to plant some seed, and he scattered it across his field. Some of the seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on the shallow soil with underlining rock. The seed sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow, but the plant soon withered under the hot sun. And since it didn't have deep roots, it died. And other soil fell among thorns that grew up and choked out the tender plant, so that that produced no grain. Still other seeds fell on fertile soil, and they sprouted, grew, and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted. Then he said, anyone who hears should listen and understand. And later, when Jesus was alone with the 12 disciples, with the others who had gathered around, they asked him what the parable meant. And he replied, you are permitted to understand the secret of the kingdom of God, but you are not, let me repeat that. You are permitted to understand the secret of the kingdom of God, but I use parables for everything I say outside, so that the scripture might be fulfilled. When they see what I do, they will learn nothing. When they hear what I say, they will not understand. Otherwise, they will turn to me and be forgiven. I think his explanation is more confusing than the parable. But we're going to talk today a little bit about the first part of this parable. And when you think about the human heart, and I think about when I was young, I think about how young and innocent, and your heart is just this fertile, this ground that is so impressionable. It's kind of like when you first toil, and if you, like you're first turning over dirt, and maybe you're planting something and you're putting topsoil on it, and it's just like, and you don't want to step on it because as soon as you do, your foot sinks in, and you try to go back and rake over it because it looks just so great. And that's how our heart is when we're young, before all the horrible things in life come up. How we're just so open to things. And I started thinking about so many of the kids that I've worked with in the past, the teenagers, and even some of the children that I've worked in, especially in college. I used to do children's ministry. And of course, growing up and seeing my own children, and now even having a grandchild, and you see it's just this really cool thing about the innocence and the fertile soil of a heart that is young. And then you watch, and as they get disappointed, even maybe it's their parents, and they and there's like things that happen, like footsteps start going on that soil, and it's like it bothers them, but it's like, well, that's just life. And then as you get older, how often people continue to step on that dirt, and you have people who aren't treating you well, and people who have an expectation and you're not meeting that expectation, and you have expectations of others and they're not, and you feel like you're getting tread on, and all this seeming traffic on the heart pounds down that once fluffy, fertile soil, and the Bible describes it as this footpath. and it's just hard as a rock. It's not. It's still soil. But it's just been so walked on that as the seed is being thrown out in our lives and we hear the word, the seed obviously represents the word, God's love. And the seed's being spread out there, and some of it falls on that footpath. And this is part of our heart that's been so hardened because of what, and oftentimes it's not our own fault, but it's our reaction to that which was so good at one point. It's our reaction to someone saying something to us, for example. I'm trying to think of a good example, which is really hard to do because there's so many, of how people you care about can be rude. So I'll give it up for my dad here. I remember one time when I was younger, and I was the good kid. And I forgot to do something. I didn't do something. And he was already in a mood, and he says, "You good for nothing, such and such." And I remembered, I was like, my dad has never said something like that to me before. And I just remember how much that hurt my feelings. And I was like, of course, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing. But those words definitely conveyed something, right? And it was hurtful. But more than what hurt me was my reaction to his initial statement. And how I didn't say it out loud because I didn't want to get in trouble, but in my heart, I had a few things to say back. And then that stuck with me. You see, this is the interesting thing about the human psyche. As a pastor, there are times when people will blame the pastor, and I'm sure in your life you've had people blame you. If you have a parent, kids will blame you. If you're a sibling, a sibling will blame you. So you'll get blamed for things that wasn't your fault. Maybe it was in school, whatever it is. And that's not a pleasant thing. And you get blamed, you get in trouble. Maybe you're at school, maybe you're at home, maybe you're just at work, whatever it is. And you get blamed for something that you didn't do. And it makes you upset. But then, what do you do with that anger or that frustration or that disappointment? Well, what I typically do is I want everyone around me to know what a jerk this person is. So I begin to let other people know, just, indiscreetly, what a jerk they are. Because I'm sure they've got you all fooled. Right? Maybe it's just the teacher at school, and it's like, me, I didn't do anything, because I was actually pretty good at that. Someone else would be really loud, and I'd be sneaky. And then I would do something, and then they would get in trouble for it, and I'd just be like, you bad person. I can't believe you just did that. You just threw something at me. You threw, I don't. And I was the good kid, so he would get in trouble. Right? No. When I wasn't actually a good kid. I was pretending to be a good kid. I was just as human and just as sinful as everyone else. And that's the point. Yeah, that's right. You can become sneaky and look good, like Christians often do. But the thing that with life and with all of those situations, you see, not only is it what people do to us, but it's our response to how we are sinned against, that when we sin back, it hardens our heart even more. And so when God's love and when those seeds are planted in our life, some of it falls over here and the birds come, and the birds tend to represent the evil, come and they eat them. And they come and they take them away. And it's just like it has no impact whatsoever. So you've probably known people that you've tried to be loving toward and you tried to be a good neighbor to, and they reciprocate zero. And it's like they didn't even notice. They didn't even act like they cared. Maybe they didn't. Because maybe their hearts are still so hard. Doesn't mean that it can't be toiled again. It doesn't mean that God can't do something in their life to dig up some of that hardness and change it. But at this point, it's too hard. So that seed just never gets anywhere close to being able to grow in that person's life. And I don't think any of us here have hard hearts like that, because we wouldn't probably be here. But we know people who are. And we know people who do. And God's like, don't give up on them. God's like, allow that seed. And sometimes it comes back, and then you'll remember something you said that was so encouraging, and they're like, I don't remember that. It's like, what do you mean? How could you not remember that? It's because they got taken away, just gone. Don't remember it. It's very frustrating. One of the things we do in Bible study on Thursdays is we try to put ourselves in the story, in the narrative, whatever's happening. Then we try to put ourselves in, what's Jesus feeling? What's the apostles feeling at this point? What's the people around feeling? What are they thinking? Or you try to put yourself in each situation. So in the heart situation, the soil situation, we think about, okay, so what if we're the soil? What is our heart? So we always think about, how, what's our hearts doing? But we also think about, well, maybe we're the farmer who's trying to sow the seeds, and the other people that we're trying to love, that's the soil that we're dealing with. And sometimes we're trying to relate to, now how are we the seed? But sometimes God puts our words and our actions into someone's life. And then we are the ones who are kind of in their heart, in their life, in a way. And it's like, how do I remain in here? And so as we look at this, and I think of that hardness that all of us, I think, can relate to in some degree, there's nothing that we, I think, it feels like, that we can do outside of allowing God in to change our heart, to take it from a heart. I think I said it a couple weeks ago. The sun that hardens the clay melts the wax. It's the same heat, the same sun that on a particular type of surface, that actually clay, which starts out all mushy, becomes hard. And wax, which is hard, becomes soft. It's an interesting thing. And it's the same sun, the same heat that has this different, because it depends on what our life is and what we're willing to allow God to do. So we can seem to be right there with God, but as he comes into our lives, we start to be hardened against it because we want to do things our way. And others that we can seem hard, but are actually willing to allow that heat to change us. And it can melt us and make us moldable and usable. So we have a hardness. And then there's others that have this rocky soil that's underneath. And it looks good on the surface, but just below the surface, it's a mess. And so the seeds, the love, the good words that you put in, they grow a little bit, and then as soon as any heat comes into their life, as soon as something bad happens, it just shrivels up and it dies. You see someone who could be super excited about it, and maybe it was us, or maybe it was someone else that we know, and it seems super excited about God, or super excited about the faith, and super excited, and they're growing, and then and then they're gone. Just gone. And now they even have an attitude. Like, yeah, well, I tried that already. Stupid. I tried faith. I tried Jesus, and he didn't work. And they think about how people seem friendly, but it's only so far, right? I used to, and I've used an example before, but like in Cheers. And Cheers is an old show, but every time Norm walked in, every time he'd walk in, it's like, Norm! Everybody knew Norm. Norm was a great guy, happy-go-lucky guy, but we don't know anything about Norm. We really don't know anything about him. And this is where a lot of us like to stay. whether it's in church, whether it's at work or wherever, just right there on the surface. You just keep it on the surface and everything will feel good, everything will seem fine. But there's a fear of allowing people to get further in to their life and to our lives. Because if someone really knows what we're about, or someone really sees what's underneath that surface, they're going to reject us. And so we only allow so much in. I think we know people that are like that. I'm not trying to be probing. I just like to get to know people. And I was visiting someone. Well, I missed a few people this week, but I was visiting someone in particular. Such a joy. This person is so fantastic of a person, right? But they have I guess a little bit of dementia and stuff. And so as I'm talking to them and I'm trying to ask questions, and I know it's a little bit spotty and they can't remember everything, to me that's a little frustrating because I really want to know more about them. And then I can see though they're getting a little frustrated because they can't remember, and I'm not like trying to grill them. I'm just trying to get to know them better. And that's a really unusual situation because normally that's not the case. Because here's a person who I know who would love to share their life with me. They're just not able to at that point because of their own physical inability. And I'll talk to other people though. And as I'm talking, I'm asking them questions. Well, some people enjoy talking about themselves, and so they're a little bit more free-flowing. Other people, they're suspicious. They're like, what? Why are you asking me? And I was like, sorry, I wasn't trying to be nosy. I'm just curious, where you're from. I'll ask them what their parents did for a living. It's not because I'm nosy. Actually, it's just because I'm trying to find out how they grew up, and I just love to hear people's stories. I was visiting Ina this week. You know Ina Haas? She's 102 years old. She was in her 20s in World War II. She was 20-something. And I'm like, that's crazy to me. And so I'm like just trying to ask her all these questions. And if you know Ida, she's like, yeah, it was bad. Really bad. I was like, so was it, you hear a lot about Hitler? All the time. Okay, Ida, give me more. I want to hear the stories. Yeah, that was really bad. All right. So I don't know if it's her way of making me come back like next week for more information. I don't know. But it's like one of those things where it's like I love hearing the stories. When I'm with my parents, I start asking them, and if people who are older than me, I love to hear about what it was like. That's just part of who I am, and I love to hear their stories, and I try to incorporate what they understood and what they went through in some way into my own life, and understand how privileged I am to live in a country that's things are so much easier now. Even as bad as it seems to get, man, it has been worse, But in the process of all of this, there's things underneath the surface that we don't know about. And we have it, we all have it, we all have those rocks that are in there. And it's like, and I know God what he wants to do is he wants to allow us to let him in to start taking some of those rocks out. Because if any of us know, the soil around here is like that. It's not the greatest, you got to go, you're going to get rocks. Every time I put a shovel in the dirt in my yard, it's always clank, clank, and there's another rock that I'm pulling out, and I'm moving. I'm pulling out, I'm moving. Well, except for my slope, which is all really easy to dig out, which is always scary because there's erosion, But other parts that I want to be like that, they're stony. The parts that I want to be solid and rocky, it's free throw. Just water hits. It's like, oh, God, please don't let my whole yard fall into the bank like my neighbors. But it's soil, you see, because it's important. But there's all these things. So there's the footpath, there's the hard, there's that seems to be growing and it doesn't really grow well because we have too much junk underneath the surface of our lives. And then there's the weeds. God, a love the weeds, man. You know, I found out recently that dandelions is really healthy for you. I'm like, man, I could have a smorgasbord in my yard. I got dandelions I got a ton of dandelions. I'm like, I could start, and I promise you this. As soon as I try to start harvesting those, they're going to disappear. They're going to be like, oh, you want us? No, we'll replace you with something else that's toxic. I'm just telling you, that's my green thumb experience. But weeds come. And this is just the things of life. The situation, it's usually the people, but sometimes it's situations. And as we're starting to grow, these things come up alongside of us, actively trying to bring us down. There's people in our lives that are actively trying to make us miserable, to make us fail. And there are those people who come into our lives who are actively trying to be a weed. Now, they may not be consciously thinking, I'm a weed, but sometimes it's because of jealousy. Sometimes it's because, jealousy in the fact that maybe they think you have more than they do. Maybe you don't deserve it. There's so many different, it's hard for me to start naming things, but people have reasons, and some of them seem completely absurd. Some of them, sometimes it could be someone at work who maybe they got passed over by you. Maybe you work harder than they do. Maybe the boss is comparing. Maybe it's that they play favorites and they're not favoring you. And these are people who have, and it's just the reality of it. And you know that it's true. It's like, oh, how do I respond to this? What am I going to do with this information? Am I going to allow these people to choke the joy and the life out of me? Or am I going to continue, with God's help, to allow Him to create change in me so that I can continue to grow and I outperform the weed? And allow God to, when it comes to the way it chokes us out, to pull it out. And I don't want to take that illustration too far. But the idea being is that we're not allowing that weed to choke us. And then there's the good soil. And the good soil doesn't mean there's no rocks in it. Doesn't mean there's no weeds in it. It's just that the good soil allows growth. It means that we're working through, and if you've ever done any gardening, which I've done very little. I did some when I was a kid. I do very little today. Lloyda will have the garden boxes, and I'm like, well, I'll put the dirt in. I'll build it for you. You do the rest. Okay, I'll put a little fence around it, try to keep the animals out. I don't know, it's just, some people find it relaxing, I find it stressful. But no matter what, there's always going to be stuff in there that tries to, it's always a work in progress. You don't just plant it and just sit back and it's like, woohoo, because I got good soil, man. I put Miracle Grow on that stuff, it is good. Because something's always going to come up and try to make it. And then the animals, they're demonic, I think. Because we'll have a little fence up there and they somehow still get in there. And you see little bite marks. It's like, what is that? That's getting into this fortress I have created. Somehow they always manage, and there's always something trying to make a problem. And we're always having to work the soil. We just always have to do it. It's the same with our own hearts. We always have to be actively. We're pulling stuff out. We're weeding it. And we're trying to take care of that which is growing and tender. And when we think of other people, when we're the actual seed, when we think about those people, we can be part of the process of continuing to spread that seed. Don't give up. Keep at it. Keep loving. Keep caring. Because God will use that at some point. I remember seeing, and I see it all the time. I mean, I can't get anything to grow in my garden, but I can get them to grow in cracks in my driveway. Things grow all the time in the places that you would never think that things could grow. Something starts to grow beautifully. I don't get it. But that's the reality of it. So keep working it.